Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to this week. We're going to talk about how to use the Morph tool to make amazing animations. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how to morph a shape. Morphing a shape means when you transition from one slide to another, the shape can change its properties and it'll make a seamless animation from one slide to the other. There are various things I can do. So first thing I'm going to do is duplicate this slide. You can right click, duplicate slide, or press Control and D to duplicate that. So now I have two slides that are the same. They have a square. On the second slide, I'm going to change that. I'm going to drag this. I'm going to place it over here. I will go to shape format and let's change the shape to something different. I think I will go from square to circle. It's kind of an oval. Let's make that a circle. Let's change the shape of it as well. So I'm changing the position on the slide, the shape itself, and the size of the shape. And let's make it red. Now, in order to make that transition, if I were to just play this as it is, it's going to go shape one, shape two, no animation. If I were to apply a transition, I can have it fade from one to the other. I can have it push up from one to the other. But what I'm going to do is morph it. And you can see a preview of that. It goes from one shape and it changes to the other shape. So let's look at that in a presentation mode here. Here's one shape and it converts it into a circle, makes it bigger. It changes the color of the circle as well. And I can go back and forth between that. Let's keep going. I'll go ahead and duplicate this slide. And now we have a red circle. Let's make that something different. I'm going to change the shape to perhaps a triangle. And let's make that an orange triangle. And I can make it maybe a short triangle. And let's keep going. Let's duplicate this a couple more times. Let's change this to something more interesting, maybe an equation sign like an X or a multiplication or whatever. And you can modify the shape how you'd like. I'll make that blue. And then just for fun, why don't I duplicate this slide and bring it full circle. All right, so since I duplicated the slides, it duplicated the morph transition as well. Otherwise, you'd click on the slide and make sure it's morph transition. So let's take a look at what we have. We're skipping from a blue rectangle towards the left. It converts it. And I like how it goes from blue, it kind of fades to purple and then red. Like blue, purple, red, circle, it's big. Now we're going to squish that down to an orange triangle. We're going to bring that triangle. That does some kind of funky stuff there, that transition. It's really exploring to get, it's going from three sides to many sides. And then it looks like I didn't, when I duplicated this first slide, it wasn't on morph yet. So let's go to morph. I can also change the duration that it takes. So let's go from the blue to the red, and let's do that in 1 second. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner, I have that option. So it's going to go real quick. This one, let's bump it up to maybe 3 seconds. And then we'll keep this maybe 1.5. And then let's bump this up to maybe 2.5. So it's pretty fun. That's real quick. And then this will be much more gradual, kind of eases into it. Goes from here and right back to the square. So this is the basic overview of what the Morph tool does. It takes one element on the screen and it makes another element. I have this shape. What I did was I have the selection pane here. I'm going to go to Home, the Home ribbon. In the editing, I'm going to make sure I have the selection pane up. You can name your shapes. By default, if I put a new shape on here, if I put a circle, it's going to put oval 7, or it's going to put rectangle 8. What I want to do is name those something specific. And you can name it whatever you want, but the trick is that you want to name it with 2 exclamation marks in front of it. And so exclamation mark, and then whatever word or series of words you want. Now, if I were to change this to a different shape, then it's going to call it from rectangle to rectangles with the corner. So now it's a different name, and that morph tool might not work. Let's try it out. So it fades out and then it fades in. But in order to get that animation, what I'll want to do is double click on this, 2 exclamation marks, and I can name it whatever. Like literally, I can name it whatever. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it here and whatever. Let's try that animation once more. All right, so now I have that animation, and that's the basics. This is how to morph a shape. You can change all kinds of properties. You can change the orientation. By orientation, I mean you can rotate it if you want. You can change the shape, size, the color, the position on the slide, and it'll make that animation from one slide to another. Let's explore some different features of the Morph tool in PowerPoint. I have an anagram that I'm going to create. So you might have seen this 11 plus 2. I'm going to name this, it's title 1, but just to be safe, I'm going to name this numbers. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to duplicate this slide. And so now I have that same text box. It's called numbers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this down and I'm going to change this. An anagram for 11 plus 2 is 12 plus 1. All right, so now if I apply the morph transition, by default, it morphs. Now the word plus stays the same, and you can see how it morphs the words one from another. It kind of blurs it out and in. But what I want to do is shuffle up the letters on here. And so I'm going to go to the morph transition, again, the effects options. This time I'm going to choose from objects, which is default, to characters. So it recognizes that there's a T, a W, an E, an L on the page, and that those are moving places. So I'm going to choose characters. And then what it does is it shuffles the characters a bit. So let's preview that in real time. I'm changing the position of it from the top to the middle, and I'm also changing the order of the characters. So let's see what that looks like. Yep, so 11 plus 1 equals 12, or 11 plus 2 equals 12 plus 1. So that's a real fancy interaction as well. That's very interesting. And this morning I looked up an anagram poem. I found this poem by Shel Silverstein about a little boy and an old man. Some brothers, Olin and Billy Fobley, also created a poem using all of the letters from Shel Silverstein's original poem. And so I put both of those in here and put a morph character animation. It takes the characters and it shuffles them up and it creates something completely new. Pretty sophisticated. Now I'm going to look at if you have words that you want them to remain words and you want them to move places. All right, so I have an animation here. You have become powerful is the statement. I want to change that to more Yoda-esque statement. Powerful you have become. And so I have all of the letters are the same, but also the words are intact. And so in order to transition from the first one to the second one, what I want to do is I don't want it to transition the objects because that'll fade everything out and then fade these in. What I want to do is transition the words. The words are all the same and I want to keep them the same, but I want them to move around on the page. So powerful you have become. Let's take a look at what that looks like in slideshow view. So you have become powerful, powerful you have become. And I took this another step and I completed the phrase. I sense the dark side in you. You have become powerful. You know, that's something I would say maybe, but we want to make this what Yoda would say. So let's shuffle that around once more and fade in a Yoda. The dark side I sense in you, powerful you have become. And so in order to do all of this, I have a text box here, and then I just duplicated the text box, or duplicated the slide, changed everything from left alignment to right alignment, kept the font the same size and the same color and everything, but then I just changed the word order on the right. And then for this one, I kept that text box and I added more words. And that's how I got that effect where the words move and then other words fade in because the original didn't have so many words. And then to get this effect, then I just took this one text box. I created two text boxes. One's on the top, one is on the bottom, and then changed the word order around. And that's how I get this animation. And then you can notice the Yoda is a picture in the background and it just fades in. It wasn't there and it is there on the second slide, and so it creates that seamless transaction. So these are some slides that I did. Now I'm going to take another poem. So here's the poem. I'm going to copy and paste this onto this image here. And this time I'm going to right align everything, and let's change this up a bit. Let's change the font. It's Calibri Light. Maybe we'll change this to a different font size, perhaps, and a different color. Maybe we'll make this blue, a dark accented blue. And I want to make sure there's morph, and I'm going to choose, if I choose objects, it's going to fade that out and, or it's going to fade in the picture rather. and it's going to move everything over. So let me do that again. And so you can see that's pretty interesting transition. Now I'm going to take this again, I'm going to copy the text box and put it on this slide, and we're going to do something different. So I'm going to left align that once again, and then I'm going to clean this up. I don't want it to be just on the same lines, so I'm going to delete some of these breaks. In fact, let's go to the home. I'm going to align the text to the top instead of the bottom. And let's put a break right here. So now it's the same words, but it looks different. So if I were to put a transition, a morph transition, and put objects, because it's so different, because there's breaks and everything, it recognizes it as something different. It's not the same text box as it was before. And so it fades out the text box on the right, and it fades in the text on the left. And so what I want to do is I'm going to animate the words. The words are all the same, they're just in a different order. So let's click on the words, and now it shuffles it around. So you can see that's an interesting effect. Let's see it in presentation mode. And the text box is going to move, and it's going to animate. And you can see that animation, it goes from left alignment to right alignment. It changes font, it changes font size, and it changes color. And so it does that pretty seamlessly. And since the text box is pretty much intact on the two slides, it has a good transition just using the objects transition. But with this one, I changed it to a word transition, and we're going to shuffle those words around. And the words are in the same order and everything, but they look differently on the line. So that's a very interesting way in that you can create that word animation. So the character animation is different than the word animation. The character animation would be like the Shel Silverstein poem, where all of the letters are there on the page and they just get shuffled around and they form different words. And then the word animation would be the words are there. We don't want to shuffle the characters around. We want to keep the words intact and just move the words to a different place. Then this would be an object animation. And then this would be a word animation. So you can see that shuffling effect right there. I'm going to show you something else, which is a pan, zoom, and then we'll talk about parallax, getting a little bit more sophisticated. We've talked about the basics. We've talked about the effect options, being able to move objects, words, and characters on the screen. And now let's get a little more creative. So I have this slide, and I have a title called The Mountains. And it's a mountain. This is a free image that I got on either Unsplash or in Microsoft. You can have access to the stock images. I have this image. Let's delete that image. I'm going to copy and paste the picture from here so you can see. I'm going to close down these windows. So you can see the image fits pretty nicely onto the screen right here. And what I'm going to do is make it bigger. For one, I'm going to drag the corner. I want to make sure that it's center aligned. If you drag it up and down, you can see that there's a line, a dashed line. So I just want to make sure that that's center. If I just zoom in, if I just take it like this and keep it right aligned, and also I need to push that to the back. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to send that to the back so that we have the heading. And if I go home and select selection pane, I can see the picture here. I can hide the picture just for a moment, just so that I can see the slide. When I unhide it, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll look on the thumbnail to the left to just see the orientation, because this picture is now much bigger than the slide. But let's see the effect that did. So you can see it zooming in. It's kind of panning and it's zooming at the same time. One thing I don't like about this effect that I did is, if you notice on the very right, it's static because it's aligned to the right side of the image. So keep your focus on the right. And I don't like how this kind of stays in place. So I'm going to exit out of this. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to move it slightly over to the right. That's all I'm going to do. So now it hangs off the page a little bit, and it's a very subtle effect. But you can see on the right now, it doesn't look so awkward. It looks like it's zooming in. And I'll mention a word of caution. You don't want to make this larger than the resolution. So let me reset the image and size. It looks like I made it a little bit big. So I'm going to make it only as big as the resolution, and I don't want to blow it up like really big, or else it'll become pixelated. So that's an effect. Another effect that I did, and this is getting kind of complicated and it's a little bit sloppy, but I'll show you. What I did is I created a parallax effect. I went into PowerPoint and I cut out some of the mountains and then left the background mountains intact. And then I zoomed in, I created two pictures and I zoomed in the four mountains more than the background mountains to create something of a parallax effect. I will demonstrate what that looks like. And it's very sloppy. You would probably maybe not want to do something so that needs precision in PowerPoint. So you'd probably want to use Photoshop or GIMP, which is free, or another photo editor to delete out part of those backgrounds. You can see it's a little bit fuzzy there, but the effect is a parallax in that it gives the perception of depth and that it looks like you're zooming in and the mountains closest to you are zooming in faster than the mountains behind you, and so it gives that depth perception. As opposed to if I were to back up a few slides to this first one, it looks like you're zooming and panning in on a still image, which is also an interesting effect. That's what Ken Burns does all the time in his documentaries, and he'll have voiceover. And the mountains of Oregon were a rich haven for settlers in the early prairie days, whatever his narrative would be. And here I have this effect. It's the same effect, but it just gives a little bit of depth to it. To do that, that's not really the focus of this webinar, but I'll just show you. I double click on this image so I can get to the picture format ribbon. And on the far left, you might not have noticed, but there's a remove background option. And so here's the picture. All you do is you mark the areas that you want to keep. So I'm going to mark, I want to keep these mountains. You scribble it nicely. And then what are the areas that I want to remove? I say, I want to remove this background. I want to remove those mountains here and not these mountains. And then you just go keep changes. Then PowerPoint will work to remove the parts that you don't want. And in this particular image, it's a little bit hard just because, the edges, it made some soft edges, so it looks a little blurry, the regular picture, but it's fine. And you could probably find other images that are easier to work with. So that's the the concept of parallax, that we talk about both zoom and pan as well as parallax. Let me try one more thing. Let's try panning without zooming. All right, so I'm going to create this slide. It's the mountains. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can see. Let me reformat this. For this, I'm going to want it the original size. All right, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this right on the left. So it's the original size, so I'm not zooming in or anything, but it's on the left and then it hangs over the right. You can see, the right is about there. And so all of this is off screen. Now I'm going to duplicate that slide, press Control D. The only thing I'm going to change is I'm going to take this image. I'm going to hold Shift on the keyboard to make sure that, it moves left perfectly aligned. And I'm going to align this to the right side of the slide. And let's make sure I have that morph transition. All right, that's pretty fast. So let's bump up the duration to maybe 6 seconds or something. And let's preview that. So here's the mountains. And so this would be an example of a panning effect. Let me change one thing real quick. So I'm going to hide the picture, and this title, the mountains, I'm actually going to place it off screen. I'm going to place it way off screen, and let's unhide this. And so can you conceptualize what that's going to look like now? I have this title that's way off screen, and it's going to morph so that it's on screen at the same time that the mountains are panning. So I'm going to unhide this. All right, so let's try this. I know the resolution is not going to be great, but hopefully it'll be smooth. Let's go one further. Let's take this, and I'm going to try and center it. All right, right there. So I can see the guide in the middle. Lets me know that this is centered. Let me duplicate that. And now I'm going to take this slide, and I'm going to right align it. Then let's take this title, and we're going to force it off to the side. And now I will unhide it again. So let's see what that looks like. That could be an interesting effect. All right, so the mountains kind of pan over. and then the title leaves while the background still pans. Yeah, so that's an interesting effect. I want to talk a little bit about the concept of the psychology of motion, just so that we can have that in our mind, the cognitive psychology involved with perception and sensation as we create these slides, because, we can do some interesting things. All right, so let's take this slide and I'm going to duplicate it and we're going to play around with the morph. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the ball and the shadow together. I'm going to hold shift and I'm just going to move them to over here. And I'll go to transition and I'm going to morph that. And there you can see the preview. And if I put this in presentation mode, then I can go back and forth. And so it looks like, magically the ball is just floating, and it gives this perception that it's going from the left side of the court to the right side of the court. Now let's take that. I'm going to duplicate this slide, put it afterwards. And so we're going to have the ball float to the right, and then we'll return it, duplicate it once more. So now I have it going from left to right to left to right. But on this second one, let's go ahead and move this up. I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to put the ball up high. And so, not much has changed other than the placement of the ball, but it creates a different effect. If I look at that, so I have the ball floating from left to right. Oh, let's put the morph transition. I'll go ahead and highlight both of these and just apply the morph. Let's try that again. It's floating above the ground from the left to the right. It returns. And now it gives the perception that it's going up, even though it's just going from one place on this flat screen to another place. In fact, the ball is flat, but because of the shadow and because of the ball, we have this perception that it's being maybe bounced or tossed into the air. So that's interesting. Let's duplicate this slide and we'll return it back to that position. And then let's do one more thing. I'm going to duplicate it one more time. And this time I'm going to take the ball and I'm going to put it over here and I'm going to make it much smaller. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift on my keyboard to make this ball smaller, maybe something like that. Let me grab that shadow. I'm going to select the shadow and I will just move that. I can't even see it hardly, but I'm going to move it onto the ground. So let's see what effect that does. So it morphs. You notice take a look at the shadow. The shadow looks like it's staying close to the ground because the ball and the shadow aren't going in parallel to each other. It's more like, a triangle. They diverge. And so the ball's looking like it's going at one angle, the shadow's going at a different angle. And it gives the illusion, the perception that the ball is being tossed out into the soccer field over there. All right, so we're looking at the ball floating on the ground, hovering there, and then it comes back. And now we're going to look at the ball going up into the air and coming back, even though it goes the same distance to the right, but it looks like it's going up as well. And now the ball looks like it's going out. So those are the effects that you can create with Morph for really just scratching the surface, because the tool is very simple to use, but the animations that you can make can be amazing. You can have scenic Ken Burns-like interactions. You can have poetry in motion, literally, with rearranging letters and words. You can morph one shape into another shape. You can create title sequences, for example. I'd like to thank everybody for attending our technology spotlight. I hope you found it interesting exploring the Morph tool and that you are inspired to have all kinds of applications and that you will find a great use for this. Thank you for attending, and we will see you next time.